Hey everyone and welcome to Storytime. My name is Jake and today we are going to be looking at the subreddit r/prorevenge. So sit back, relax and enjoy some Reddit stories. Tour manager thinks he knows better than the technical staff for being a big name comedian. Probably cost his job. So this happened quite a few years ago. I used to work as a senior technician for a large entertainment venue, around 2,000 standing capacity. Most of the time, we would have private events, etc. But this particular day, a very well-known comedian was booked to do an hour at the venue. Before the show, I was expected to meet with this tour manager, discuss his needs, set up stuff, etc. He arrives and immediately sets the tone. Personally, I think they thought they were too big to play our venue, but they clearly didn't know what they got into. Dave won't use any of your bad mics, he tours with his own sound system. Sure, when is it getting here? I've got it with me, the manager said in the most condescending tone ever. He proceeded to pull out a self-contained speaker system no bigger than a suitcase. There was no way it was going to fill the first 2 rows of tables, never mind the rest of the venue, which would be at capacity that night. No problem, I can give you a tie line so you can use our speakers. That's not acceptable, Dave will only use our speakers and mic. To cut a long story short, I spent about 15 minutes arguing with the guy who was belligerent and refused to acknowledge that his bad system on its own wouldn't fill the venue, and there was no way I could let them do it, without support from us. I explained he would have full control over the sound, my gear was just there to amplify it. I wouldn't need to touch the desk. This still wasn't good enough for him, and he threatened to pull Dave from the show. Edit for clarity, he was very aggressive and condescending. At a few points, he tried to claim I didn't know what I was doing, and that I shouldn't be employed by the company as I was clueless, no matter how much I explained the science, etc. He tried to scare me into doing what he wanted by threatening to pull the show. There was no need for this. It was him being stubborn and trying to pull the power, thinking I wouldn't back down and let him cause serious complaints for the venue because of his poor tech knowledge. He eventually backed down when I told him fine, I'd call the venue manager and explain the situation. I'd get a night off and he wouldn't get paid, much rather than the hundreds of complaints and refunds. He backed down and we set up for the show, but he was still a jerk and the act was no better. They clearly thought they were better than us and it showed. The act even walked around backstage in his boxers into different people's dressing rooms without knocking. Between them, they both managed to annoy everyone. I had enough. The tour manager had set up a little sound desk at the side of the stage for him to use, for Dave's microphone. He was standing there throughout the show, mixing his mic. Where he put himself meant he couldn't hear how it sounded, but could be seen by everyone. My lighting operator and I were at the back of the room a few hundred feet away, and hatched our plan. The first few minutes of the show were fine, until the tour manager moved away from his desk to listen. As he walked away, for some strange reason, Dave's mic would feedback. He would run back to the desk, try to correct it, but it would solve itself. A couple of minutes later, he would walk away and would start to get that horrible feedback again. Nothing that the audience would notice too much, but Dave and his tour manager certainly did. The tour manager was puzzled. He couldn't understand why this was happening, and Dave was getting more and more irate, glaring at his manager throughout the act. What they didn't know was that I was watching the manager, and every time he stepped away, I turned up the high frequencies on my desk, causing the feedback. As he got to the desk, I would correct it and get rid of the feedback myself. Rinse and repeat. He got so annoyed he came to the back of the venue, barged into our control box and looked at my desk. which of course was set naturally as we had discussed. "Have you touched your desk?" "No, mate." "Oh, actually, I did once. Seemed like you were struggling with feedback, so I took a bit of the top out." He walked away sheepishly back to his desk. About halfway there, the mic started feeding back again, this time quite aggressively. He had to run the last 50 feet or so, which only drew more attention to him, especially from Dave the comedian. On his way out of the venue, I heard the tour manager being chewed out by Dave about how incompetent he was. A few years later, I meet Dave at another venue I'm working at. Turns out he's a decent enough guy. Didn't mention the revenge I did on the tour manager, but told him about the gig. Turns out it was one of the last times he used that manager. One of the reasons being how bad that gig was. You know, the people that are setting up your entire show and making sure it runs okay and you be a douche to them, that's probably not the best idea, is it? Terminated me while on medical leave, put them on permanent leave. So first, your typical backstory. I was an employee at a well-known breakfast chain, particularly popular for their wide selection of pancakes, for nearly 3 years. I was decently well liked among the other employees and had a very good friend who had just been promoted to a shift manager by the former general manager, who was a really great guy that unfortunately got transferred to a different store against his wishes. He was replaced by a horrible, power-hungry shift manager that no one cared for. So a typical work week for me was 6 days a week, between 60 to 70 hours a week, with Tuesdays being my only day off. My shifts ranged from 8 hours to as much as an 18-hour double shift, important later. I worked this schedule without complaint for years of my life. Unfortunately, on September the 10th, I fell very ill while at work with no known cause. This was accompanied by a very severe stabbing pain in my lower right abdomen. I called the general manager, it was about 12 AM at this point, and informed her that I planned on leaving to go to the ER, to which she told me if I left, then I would be fired. Now, at the time, I really needed this job, so not wanting to be fired, I decided to work through my shift. I had 2 hours remaining, but it was hell to work through. Finally, 2 AM rolled around and I immediately left to drive to the hospital. Upon arrival, I was admitted almost immediately into the hospital due to scan results showing an inflamed appendix. I called the general manager and let her know that I was being admitted to the hospital and would keep her updated. Her response? "If you're trying to get out of work, can you at least find someone to cover your shift in the morning?" Some people. Note, at this point, it was around 3:30 AM. My next shift that she wanted me to cover was at 8 AM the next morning. A few hours later, I was notified that I needed an appendectomy, and it would be scheduled for the following morning. I agreed, signed the release, and called up my manager to notify her. I told her that I would be out of work for at least a few days, but after the surgery I'd let her know. It is important to know that I kept her informed throughout my entire absence. I even sent her a picture of myself laying in a hospital bed after multiple accusations of faking. I still have the text if anyone is interested. So surgery went smoothly. However, they found that I had a gangrene infection in my appendix that appeared to have spread. Due to complications involving this, my hospital stay ended up being 2 full weeks. I was discharged at noon and drove to work almost immediately after discharge to inform them I was out of the hospital and cleared to come back, as well as to turn in the hospital note, proving I was there. To my surprise, the regional manager is there. I walk in and find both the regional and the general manager at the front counter having a conversation. I slide the note towards them on the desk and inform them that I was cleared to come back to work. The general manager looked at me in utter disbelief. "Excuse me, you've already been terminated for no call, no showing for 2 weeks. I reminded her that I did in fact keep her informed and had proof. She cut me off, and with an annoyed tone said that she'd give me another chance. I came back in that night for my shift, luckily working with my friend the shift manager. I was also training a guy I had never seen before, not uncommon as I was a floor supervisor / trainer. My friend called me into the office, and that's when I learned that I was only rehired so that I couldn't file a wrongful termination suit, and said that the person I was currently training was my replacement. The general manager had plans to fire me the next morning. As shocked as I was, we immediately hatched a plan. So this restaurant was dirty. Huge roaches infesting the kitchen and dining room, black mold, rotten food mixed with fresh food, water leaks so bad the carpet in the dining room is literally decaying, you name it. We have reported these issues to the general manager multiple times, but nothing ever happened. My friend sent the trainee home with the excuse that our labor was too high, and I spent the remainder of the shift taking pictures of every continuous health code violation I saw. I went as far as cooking outdoors, just so I could get pictures of the grills and the kitchen areas without suspicion from other employees. Finally, the next morning rolled around. I woke up to a call from the general manager. Sure enough, she demanded that I turn my uniform in because I was being terminated immediately. I drove up there and asked for the reason behind my termination, and she replied that I was a lazy worker who always complained that they had hours. Please remember, I averaged about 64 hours a week and never complained. Not in the mood to argue, I simply turned in my uniform and left. But that's not the end of my plan. I was one of the only food safety permitted employees. I had just renewed my permit, so all of the information in the class was fresh on my mind. I also distinctly remember the health inspector teaching the class stated that if we wanted to report our workplace, just come in, ask for him, and bring evidence. I went straight to the health department, asked to speak to him, and supplied 7 written paragraphs of every violation, as well as all the pictures I had taken to back my claim up. He informed me that with the picture evidence, it would be hard for the restaurant to fight. He also informed me he would follow up with a surprise inspection the next morning. The next morning, I woke up and found messages from my general manager, calling me a snitch and a greener or whiner. Luckily, my friend recorded the entire inspection from the office. Due to how recent this story is, I will not be releasing it due to it showing faces, as well as names being mentioned. But it was beautiful, and showed who the true whiner was in this situation. The general manager was slapped with a hefty $7,000 fine for allowing unpermitted employees to work, and the restaurant was ordered to shut down operations permanently. Now, as much as I want to feel bad for the people left without work, I don't, and for the decent employees, the story actually has somewhat of a happy ending. My friend has always talked about wanting to open her own 50s diner-style restaurant, where everything is cooked homemade and with care. What better location to do it than in a familiar location where you already know what's wrong with the building and what needs fixed? She applied for a loan, and on October 13th of this year, she purchased the building. Renovations have already begun, and a new diner, named after the highway it is built directly beside, is expected to occupy the space by January of 2020. As far as employees go, I have been given the role of shift manager, and the employees who are clean, permitted, and hard workers from the former restaurant are being offered the same positions at the new restaurant. Cooks will be cooks and servers will be servers, etc. I've gotta say, their like not a wrongful termination excuse is very shady because I don't think they can do that. And someone in the comments put this: one thing I've learned from this sub, in life you can be crooked or you can be a jerk. Never be both. And yep, that's exactly right. Hey everyone, I hope you all had a really good day and that you enjoyed that video. If you want to check out some other videos, then click on screen right now or check out the playlist down below. If you enjoyed that video, then please do leave a like. And if you want to submit your own stories, then you can do so by joining the Discord in the top link in the description. But thank you so much for watching and I will see you very soon.